Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something a little bit different. We're diving headfirst into a world where snakes wear feathers, palaces are more like cosmic mazes than cozy homes, and entire cities were built to echo the structure of the universe itself. Yeah, you heard that right. Stone and myth intertwined, carved into the earth like somebody's attempt to make sense of the heavens above. So, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's begin this journey. And hey, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always wild to see how many corners of the globe tune into the same story at once. Now, when you hear ancient palace or temple, what do you picture? Maybe marble columns gleaming in the sun, maybe some Indiana Jones-style ruin with vines crawling down the stone walls. Or if you've been to Central America, maybe you imagine step pyramids rising out of the jungle like geometric mountains. But let's be honest, the way we usually picture ancient architecture is neat, sterile, and kind of museum-like. What we're going to see tonight is the opposite. Messy, overwhelming, sacred, and terrifying all at once. These weren't just buildings, they were cosmic machines. And in the center of it all, a snake. But not just any snake, a feathered one. Why feathers? Why take one of nature's most primal, fear-inducing creatures and dress it up like a bird? That's the paradox right there. To the people of Mesoamerica, from the Olmecs to the Maya and Aztecs, the serpent wasn't just a creepy crawler. It was the embodiment of duality. A snake slithers on the ground, belly pressed to the earth. A bird soars up in the sky, closer to the sun and stars. Put those two together, and you get a creature that bridges the cosmic divide. Earth and heaven, underworld and sky, chaos and order. You can't get more symbolic than that. And trust me, they leaned into it. Take Teotihuacan, for instance, that sprawling city of stone not far from modern Mexico City. At its heart lies the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, or Quetzalcoatl, depending on the time and the people. Imagine walking up to that building when it was new. Today it's worn, weathered, stripped of its original colors, but back then, bright red, gleaming with blue and green pigments, serpent heads jutting out of the walls like they're lunging straight at you. Their jaws are open, fangs bared, eyes bulging, and scattered between them, seashells carved into the stone, symbols of water and fertility. This wasn't a chill place to hang out. It was a stage set for the gods. But here is where it gets darker. Archaeologists digging beneath that temple found mass graves. Dozens, maybe hundreds of bodies laid out with military regalia, sacrificed to dedicate the temple. Think about that. To switch on this cosmic machine, they fed it human life. To us, it sounds horrific, barbaric even, but to them, it was essential. The feathered serpent wasn't just a decorative motif. It was a living force. If you wanted balance between the heavens and the earth, you had to give something back, and that something was blood. So let's zoom out for a second. Imagine the way these people lived. You wake up in a stone house with a thatched roof. You hear the sound of vendors setting up in the marketplace. Maybe you smell tortillas cooking on a comal, that flat clay griddle, smoke rising in the morning air. You walk outside and bam, there's a pyramid dominating your skyline, massive and angular, its steps climbing up toward the sun. And you know that at the top, priests are conducting rituals, burning incense, offering sacrifices. The city isn't just a place to live, it's a reflection of the cosmos. Every street, every wall, every mural is loaded with meaning, and that's the real kicker. For us, architecture is mostly functional. We worry about plumbing, insulation, the HOA yelling at us because our lawn's too long. For them, architecture was myth in stone. You didn't just build walls, you built cosmic order. You didn't just walk into a palace, you walked into the axis of the universe. And every time you passed a carved serpent head, you were reminded of the delicate balance holding everything together. Now let me hit you with something that's easy to overlook. Those labyrinthine palaces, they weren't cozy. They weren't built for comfort or privacy or binge watching your favorite shows. No, they were sprawling, confusing, intentionally disorienting. Think about the Palace of Palenque in the Maya world. It's a maze of rooms, corridors, courtyards. You walk in, and instead of a straightforward layout, you're caught in a network of spaces that feel like they're leading you somewhere, but never in a straight line. That was the point. Movement through the palace mirrored movement through the cosmos, winding, difficult, always layered with hidden meaning. Picture yourself walking through one of these palaces at night, torchlight flickering on the stucco walls, shadows stretching like grasping fingers. You hear the echoes of your own footsteps, maybe a distant drumbeat outside in the plaza. The whole place is designed to make you feel small, lost, humbled. It's not just architecture, it's initiation. And let's not forget the elite who lived there. Kings, queens, priests, people who weren't just political leaders, but cosmic ones. Their job wasn't simply to rule or collect tribute. Their job was to keep the cosmos running. That's why they wore feathered serpent headdresses, why they staged elaborate rituals in these palaces. They weren't just dressing up, they were literally embodying the gods. To rule was to channel divine power. And if you failed, well, that wasn't just a bad Yelp review of your reign. It was cosmic collapse. So when we talk about feathered serpents and labyrinthine palaces, we're not just talking about snakes carved in stone or fancy floor plans. We're talking about entire civilizations built on the idea that the world itself is fragile. That balance between chaos and order has to be maintained through ritual, sacrifice, and architecture that ties your daily life directly to the cosmos. So let's keep walking deeper into this world. We've got the feathered serpents glaring at us from the stone walls of Teotihuacan, and we've stepped into the shadowy corridors of Maya palaces. But you know what's fascinating? The deeper you go into these labyrinthine spaces, the more you realize they weren't just royal playgrounds. They were theaters, stages where politics, religion, and cosmic drama all collided. Take the Maya cities, for example. Palenque, Copan, Uxmal. These weren't just clusters of buildings. They were orchestrated environments. Courtyards weren't random, empty spaces. They were cosmic plazas. Columns weren't just load-bearing architecture. They were symbols of the world tree, the axis that connects the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. And those confusing palace layouts, they forced you to move in ritual ways, as if your footsteps were a form of prayer. Now, imagine you're one of the elites in this setting. You're not just strolling casually in your palace pajamas. Every move you make is public theater. You walk into a courtyard and boom, the space is designed to frame you against the sky, with murals and glyphs reminding everyone that you're not just a guy with a crown. You are the living bridge between humans and gods. And let's be honest, that's a lot of pressure. Forget worrying about quarterly taxes. You're worrying about whether the maize will grow, whether the rains will come, and whether the sun will keep rising because you performed the right ritual. But here's the kicker. These palaces weren't actually cozy. Forget about cushy beds and Netflix binge sessions. In fact, most Maya palaces were stuffy, hot, and echoey. The stone absorbed heat all day and radiated it at night. You had mosquitoes buzzing around, humidity sticking to your skin, smoke from torches filling the air. It wasn't luxury the way we imagine it. It was ritual theater disguised as living quarters. Now, about those feathered serpents again. By the time you get to the classic Maya, they had taken that serpent imagery and expanded it. It wasn't just Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan. It was woven into nearly everything. Serpent bars, serpent crowns, serpent motifs carved into lintels. You walk through a palace and serpents are everywhere, curling around doorways, sliding down staircases, framing the bodies of rulers. Why? Because serpents represented portals. Think about it. A snake sheds its skin, emerging reborn. That's not just nature, it's cosmic symbolism. Every time you see a serpent, it's a reminder that you can move between worlds, that death isn't the end, that rebirth is possible. But here's a question worth asking. Did people actually believe their kings were gods? Or was it just political propaganda carved in stone? The answer is both. For the farmer out in the fields, hauling maize under the blazing sun, the palace might have seemed like another world. Those towering walls and serpent motifs weren't just art, they were intimidating. Cosmic billboards screaming, "This ruler is keeping the universe alive." And honestly, if you believed that the sun's rising depended on a guy in an elaborate headdress shedding his own blood in ritual, wouldn't you think twice before challenging his authority? And, oh yes, blood. We can't skip that. These labyrinthine palaces were full of rituals involving bloodletting. Not just sacrifices of captured enemies, but self-sacrifice too. Kings and queens would pull thorny ropes through their tongues, let their blood drip onto bark paper, and then burn it. Out of that smoke, they believed, emerged visions of gods and ancestors, often in serpent form. Imagine standing in a courtyard, watching your ruler grimace as blood poured from his tongue, and then seeing priests point to the smoke curling upward, claiming it was a divine vision. That's drama. That's cosmic theater in its rawest form. And you know what? That's why these palaces were mazes, because part of the ritual was movement. You don't just walk straight into the throne room like some modern CEO's office. No, you wind through passageways, climb staircases, duck under lintels. It's disorienting, frustrating, but deliberate. By the time you reach the central chamber, you're not just physically exhausted, you're mentally primed to accept the idea that you're entering another dimension. Architecture as ritual manipulation. Let's pause and picture the sensory overload of one of these ceremonies. You're in the palace courtyard. Drums are pounding, rattles shaking, incense thick in the air. The walls are painted in reds and blues, murals showing gods with jaguar heads and serpents spiraling through the sky. The ruler emerges, wearing a headdress taller than he is, feathers cascading down like waterfalls. He carries a staff carved into the form of a serpent, jade glittering in the torchlight. The crowd gasps, not because they think he's fashionable, but because in this moment, he is the feathered serpent, the human embodiment of cosmic order. And in the background, those labyrinthine walls ensure that sound bounces around in eerie ways. A drumbeat doesn't just hit once, it echoes, reverberates, multiplies. Torches flicker against worms, shadows stretching in strange, unsettling forms. The palace itself becomes part of the ritual, amplifying the performance, turning stone into a living participant. That's the genius of it all. These weren't just rulers showing off wealth. They were engineers of belief, choreographers of cosmic theater. And every time someone got lost in a palace corridor or stared up at a carved serpent with fangs bared, the message was clear. The cosmos is vast, chaotic, terrifying. But don't worry, our rulers have it under control. As long as you do your part, pay your tribute, plant your maize, shed your blood when called upon, the universe will keep turning. And that, mule them anything, is what these feathered serpents and labyrinthine palaces remind us. That the line between stone and myth was razor thin. To walk those corridors was to walk the cosmos itself. Let's pull back for a second and look at the bigger picture. Because these feathered serpents and labyrinthine palaces weren't just art and architecture, they were cosmic blueprints. Every stone, every angle, every wall placement was tied to the stars above. You think people today get obsessed with feng shui or horoscope alignments? The Maya, the Aztecs, the builders of Teotihuacan, they took it to another level. Entire cities were aligned to track celestial movements. Palaces and temples were, in a very real sense, calendars you could walk through. Take Chichen Itza, probably the most famous Maya site. You've seen pictures of El Castillo, that iconic pyramid of Kukulkan. And yeah, it's impressive on its own. Massive staircases, steep angles, looming presence in the middle of the Yucatan jungle. But here's the real showstopper. During the equinox, shadows slither down the staircase, forming the illusion of a serpent sliding toward the earth. That's not an accident. That's precision engineering with the cosmos in mind. The builders weren't just architects. They were astronomers with stone as their medium. Now, picture this. Thousands of people gathered in the plaza, staring at the pyramid during sunset. The air is buzzing with expectation. Drums beat in rhythm with your heart. And then, right as the sun hits the perfect angle, a shadow serpent undulates down the stairs. The crowd gasps. Whispers ripple through. The feathered serpent has descended. It's a cosmic spectacle baked into the stone, repeating twice a year, binding human ritual to the turning of the heavens. Talk about special effects without CGI. But it wasn't just Chichen Itza. Teotihuacan, centuries earlier, was also aligned with celestial events. Its main avenue, the Avenue of the Dead, is oriented to track the setting of the Pleiades, a star cluster central to Mesoamerican myth. The pyramids of the sun and the moon, massive, hulking structures, were placed not for convenience, but to mirror the heavens. You walked through that city and felt as if the entire urban plan was an echo of the cosmos. Streets became constellations. Temples became stars. And here's something fun to think about. They didn't separate science and religion the way we do. For them, astronomy wasn't just about calculating eclipses. It was about survival. If you miscalculated when to plant maize, you starved. If you failed to predict the rains, your people suffered. So when rulers claimed they could read the stars, they weren't just boasting. They were proving they deserved their throne. Your king wasn't just a politician. He was your cosmic timekeeper. Now, think about how all this ties back to the feathered serpent. What better symbol of cosmic cycles than a creature that sheds its skin? The serpent becomes eternal renewal, tied to the movements of the stars, rebirth after death, day after night. And add feathers. Now it's not just about Earth and underworld, it's about the heavens too. Boom, you've got a perfect cosmic mascot, etched in stone, slithering down staircases in shadow shows, carved into doorways where kings entered, painted onto walls where rituals unfolded. But let's not romanticize this too much. These cosmic designs weren't just awe-inspiring, they were terrifying. Imagine being a farmer dragged into the city during one of these massive ceremonies. You don't know the exact astronomy, but you know that your ruler's palace is aligned with the heavens, that shadows move like serpents across pyramids, that the gods themselves seem to appear on command. And then you watch as prisoners of war are marched up those same stairs, their chests opened to offer blood to fuel the cosmic order. You might cheer, you might weep, but one thing's for sure, you believe, because how could you not? The evidence is carved into stone and written in the sky. Let's go inside again, into one of those labyrinthine palaces. The alignments weren't just external, they were internal too. Rooms lined up with solstice light, windows positioned so the first rays of dawn pierced through on specific days. Imagine standing in a pitch-black chamber, waiting, and then suddenly a shaft of sunlight breaks through, hitting the wall, illuminating a carved glyph or a serpent's head. That's not random. That's ritual astronomy, designed to leave you speechless. And rulers milked that for all it was worth. You've got to admire the theatricality. Picture it. The king stands in the chamber, people packed in the courtyard outside. The sun rises, light floods through, and bam, the king is bathed in golden light. To the crowd, it looks like the universe itself is blessing his rule. That's not just good stage management, that's divine propaganda. And the best part, you can't fake it. The sun really does rise on cue. Shadows really do form serpents. Stars really do align. Nature itself is your special effects department. But here's the subtle genius. These designs weren't just for the elites. They structured daily life. The marketplace, the ball court, the streets, all of them were oriented to the cosmos. Even buying maize or watching a ball game was, in a sense, happening inside a cosmic map. Imagine if your local supermarket was aligned to the rising of Venus. Every time you bought bread, you'd be reminded of the morning star's role in myth. That's the level of cosmic saturation we're talking about. Now, let's not pretend everything was precise clockwork. These cities were messy too. Buildings layered over older ones, renovations shifting things slightly. Palaces expanded as dynasties changed. But that's part of the story. The cosmos itself is chaotic, layered, constantly in flux. Just like a serpent shedding skin, just like a labyrinth that never quite has a single path. The mess was part of the meaning. And if you're wondering, was this unique to Mesoamerica? Not entirely. Ancient Egypt aligned pyramids to stars, Stonehenge tracked solstices. But here, the imagery of serpents, feathers, blood, and labyrinths made it Veso. Other cultures gave you math. Mesoamerica gave you theater. Cosmic design you could literally get lost in, both physically and spiritually. So next time someone says these were just ruins, think again. These were living star maps, giant cosmic machines humming with ritual power, with the feathered serpent slithering right through the center. Now, if you thought pyramids and palaces were the main stage for cosmic drama, think again, because in Mesoamerica, even sports weren't just games. They were myth, theater, and sometimes death sentences, all rolled into one. And at the heart of this spectacle, the ball court. Picture this. A massive stone structure, walls sloping inward, sometimes shaped like a giant eye. At the top of each wall, stone rings or hoops. The playing field was long and narrow, like a corridor carved straight into the city. And everywhere you looked, carvings of serpents, skulls, warriors, and gods. This wasn't your neighborhood rec center. This was a cosmic battlefield. The game itself, called Olamalistli by the Aztecs, was simple in rules, but brutal in execution. Two teams faced off, trying to keep a heavy rubber ball in play. No hands, no feet, just hips, elbows, maybe knees. You think soccer players dive too much? Try slamming your hip into a rock-hard ball weighing up to 9 pounds again and again while the entire city watches. Forget shin guards. You're walking away a bruised, maybe bleeding, maybe not walking away at all. But here's the thing. This wasn't just about athleticism. It was about the cosmos. The ball represented the sun, or sometimes the moon. The two teams? Cosmic forces. The underworld versus the heavens. Night versus day. Chaos versus order. Every bounce, every ricochet was a mini reenactment of the eternal struggle that kept the universe running. And the court itself? A symbolic portal. Many ball courts were aligned to celestial events, their walls carved with serpents or jaguars, their layouts mimicking the pathways between worlds. If you've read the Popol Vuh, the sacred Maya text, you'll remember that the hero twins themselves played ball against the gods of the underworld. And spoiler alert, it didn't go well at first. The twins were summoned down into Xibalba, forced to play on the god's home turf, which was basically a rigged death trap. Imagine playing a championship game where the field itself is trying to kill you. Razor-sharp blades springing from the walls, pits of fire, rivers of blood. The twins lost, were sacrificed, but eventually tricked the gods, were reborn, and descended as the sun and the moon. And just like that, the ball game became myth in motion. Every match echoed the original game played at the dawn of time. So when you're watching a match in one of these courts, you're not just watching sweaty guys hit a ball around. You're watching the creation story reenacted in real time. The crowd isn't cheering for a team. They're cheering for cosmic order to prevail. And sometimes the stakes were literally life and death. Now, here's where things get grisly. There's a lot of debate among scholars about whether winners or losers were sacrificed. Either way, somebody's blood was spilled on that court. Imagine the final point scored. The crowd roars, the drums thunder, and then silence. The defeated or victorious team is dragged before the altar, decapitated, their blood spilling onto the sacred field. To us, it sounds like the worst after-game ceremony ever. To them, it was necessary. The universe demanded fuel, and the ballgame was the delivery system. And yes, serpents show up here too. At Chichen Itza, the great ball court, one of the largest ever built, features carvings of serpents slithering alongside the players, jaws open, tongues flicking. Some panels even show decapitated players, with serpents sprouting from their necks like streams of blood. To modern eyes, that looks grotesque, surreal. But for the Maya, it was symbolic. Blood was life. Sacrifice wasn't the end. It was transformation, renewal, the shedding of skin just like the serpents. Think about the atmosphere of one of these games. The sun beating down, sweat soaking your tunic, the smell of copal incense wafting from the altars, the crowd pressed shoulder to shoulder, thousands of people chanting, shouting, gasping with every bounce of the ball, musicians pounding drums, blowing conch shells, rattles hissing, the court itself amplifying sound, bouncing echoes around like a supernatural amplifier. And above it all, carved stone serpents watching, unblinking, as if waiting for the blood they knew would come. It's almost eerie how seamlessly daily life merged with myth. Imagine being a kid playing a pickup game with a homemade rubber ball. You're not just passing time, you're reenacting the cosmic struggle. Even if you don't fully realize it, the court looms over you as a reminder. This isn't just sport, this is sacred. And the rulers leaned into that hard. Every public match was propaganda. Every sacrifice was proof that the cosmic order still held, that the ruler's connection to the divine was unbroken. And let's be honest, this wasn't just about belief. It was about control. What better way to remind people of their place in the cosmic machine than to stage a bloody spectacle in the city's heart? You come for the game, you leave with a gut-deep reminder. The cosmos is fragile. Your rulers are its guardians, and blood, sometimes yours, sometimes your enemies, is the price of balance. But here's what really gets me. Imagine standing in that ball court after the crowd has left, the echoes still hanging in the air, the walls carved with serpents staring down at you, the faint coppery smell of blood lingering, the silence pressing in, broken only by the wind, and you realize the court itself feels alive. It's not a ruin. It's not an empty field. It's a cosmic arena, forever replaying that eternal match between light and darkness, life and death. So, when we talk about labyrinthine palaces and feathered serpents, don't forget the ball courts, because here, even games weren't escapes from the cosmos. They were the cosmos, and every bounce of the ball was another reminder that life itself was a struggle, and the gods demanded proof that humans were willing to keep playing. If the ball courts were arenas for cosmic battles, then the underworld was the eternal stage beneath it all. And in Mesoamerica, the underworld wasn't some vague idea, it was tangible, carved into the landscape, lurking in caves, wells, and rivers. The feathered serpent wasn't just a sky creature, it was also a master of these watery, shadowy domains. To understand these labyrinthine palaces and serpent myths, you've got to follow them underground. Let's start with caves. To the Maya, caves were literal doorways to Xibalba, the underworld. Not metaphors, not symbolic entrances, actual portals. When you walked into a cave, you weren't just spelunking, you were crossing into another realm, and they treated them that way. Ritual objects, offerings, even human remains have been found deep inside cave systems, left as gifts to the gods of darkness and water. Imagine trudging through pitch-black passages, torches barely illuminating the dripping limestone, the sound of water echoing like whispers from the other side. Every step would have felt like walking deeper into the cosmos itself. And then you've got cenotes, those natural sinkholes in the limestone bedrock of the Yucatan. To us, they're Instagram-perfect swimming holes, bright turquoise, sunlight glinting off the surface. To the Maya, they were sacred wells, mouths of the underworld. The most famous, the sacred cenote at Chichen Itza, was a site of sacrifice for centuries. Archaeologists have dredged up jade, gold, pottery, and yes, human remains from its depths. Victims, sometimes children, were thrown into the water as offerings to the rain god Chak and to the cosmic order itself. Now think about how this ties into architecture. Palaces and temples weren't just plopped down randomly. They were often built near or aligned with these natural features. A pyramid rising above a cenote wasn't just a coincidence. It was a cosmic equation. Heaven above, earth in the middle, underworld below, all stacked in a single sacred landscape. You didn't just live in a city, you lived in a three-tiered cosmos, embodied in stone, water, and cavern. And of course, the serpent is there too. Water and serpents go hand in hand. The serpent undulates like a river, vanishes into holes like a cave, emerges unpredictably like a spring. The feathered serpent, then, isn't just bridging earth and sky. It's diving into the watery underworld, too. It's the total package, slithering through every cosmic layer, uniting them into one terrifying, awe-inspiring whole.
Let's get specific. At Palenque, the Temple of the Inscriptions, one of the great Maya monuments, is more than just a pyramid. Beneath it lies a tomb, the resting place of the great King Pakal. To reach it, you descend a narrow stairway deeper and deeper into darkness until you stand before a sarcophagus carved with one of the most famous images in Maya art. Pakal himself is shown falling or rising into the jaws of a cosmic serpent, framed by the world tree, surrounded by celestial symbols. That image has fueled endless interpretations.
From academic theories about rebirth to wild, ancient astronaut nonsense. But the essence is clear. Death wasn't the end. It was a passage, a transformation, a journey into the underworld and beyond. And those labyrinthine palaces we keep talking about, they echoed the same idea. Corridors winding like caves, rooms opening unexpectedly like caverns. You get lost not just physically, but cosmically, like descending into Xibalba. In some places, architects even incorporated actual caves into the palace design. Imagine living in a room that opened onto a yawning cavern, shadows stretching forever, the air damp and heavy. The palace becomes a hybrid, part human dwelling, part divine threshold. It wasn't all solemn, though. Water and the underworld were also about fertility, abundance, renewal. Rain gods, water serpents, feathered serpents, they weren't just about death. They were about the rebirth that comes after it. The maze cycle depended on rain, and rain came from the gods of the underworld. So when sacrifices were thrown into cenotes, or when kings bled themselves before cave altars, it wasn't just to appease terrifying deities. It was to keep the crops alive, to make sure your next tortilla didn't come at the cost of famine. Let's pause and picture a ritual in a cave. Torches flickering, smoke curling against the stone ceiling. Priests chanting, their voices amplified by the natural acoustics, until it sounds like an army of spirits. Offerings of jade glinting in the firelight before they dropped into a pool of black water. The crowd behind you hushed, shivering, convinced that the gods themselves are listening in the depths. That's not abstract religion. That's full-body immersion into the cosmos. And of course, rulers used this too. Kings and queens descended into caves not just as humans, but as actors playing their cosmic roles. They emerged from the underworld like gods reborn, proving their divine legitimacy. You want proof your ruler is chosen by the cosmos? Watch him disappear into a cavern with offerings and emerge hours later in triumph, claiming visions from the feathered serpent itself. Try arguing with that when your whole worldview says caves are literal portals to divine realms. It's almost theatrical how perfectly all these layers tie together. Pyramids reaching for the stars, palaces twisting like mazes, ball courts replaying cosmic battles, caves yawning in through the underworld. And running through all of it, the feathered serpent, the ultimate symbol of movement between worlds. So the next time you picture a Maya city or an Aztec temple, don't just think about stone rising above the jungle canopy. Think about what's underneath, too. The hidden water, the yawning caves, the sacrifices swallowed by cenotes. Because the cosmos wasn't just up in the heavens, it was right under your feet, wet, dark, and hungry. If caves and cenotes were cosmic stages, then kings and queens were the headliners of the show. These weren't quiet administrators balancing grain accounts. They were living embodiments of myth. Their job wasn't just to govern, it was to perform, to bleed, to dress, to transform, to convince everyone that they weren't merely human, but something far stranger. Intermediaries who could slip between worlds. Picture this: the king of a Maya city, perched on a throne carved with serpent heads, draped in jade, feathers streaming from his headdress like a peacock on steroids. He doesn't just look impressive, he's a walking cosmogram. That headdress isn't fashion, it's theology. The feathers evoke Quetzalcoatl or Kukulkan, the serpent with plumage, the creature that connects heaven and earth. And when the king wears that regalia, he's not just styling himself. He's claiming, I am the bridge. I am the axis. And then comes bloodletting. Forget about dull speeches or ribbon cuttings. In this world, power was measured in how much of your own life you were willing to spill for the gods. Kings and queens pierced their tongues, ears, even their genitals, drawing blood to feed the divine. The blood was collected on bark paper, burned, and the smoke rising was believed to become a vision serpent. Yes, a literal giant, smoke-like serpent appearing in the ritual imagination, its jaws opening to reveal gods, ancestors, or cosmic messages. Think of it as the ultimate psychedelic stage effect, except it's fueled by very real pain and very real blood. You can see this immortalized in Maya art. On lintels from Yaxchaclan, for instance, Lady Shook, a queen, is shown pulling a thorned rope through her tongue, blood dripping down. Out of the rising smoke emerges a vision serpent, its mouth gaping wide with a warrior spirit stepping out. This wasn't private devotion, it was spectacle, carved in stone for everyone to remember. And the message was clear: the royal family could summon gods with their own veins. But this performance wasn't random. It was choreographed, often tied to cosmic events. Solar eclipses, planetary alignments, the sacred calendar, all were opportunities for the king to step on stage. Imagine thousands gathered in a plaza, the pyramid looming above, the air thick with incense. The king ascends, cuts his flesh, raises the blood-soaked paper, and suddenly the cosmos feels right again. The crowd doesn't just see pain, they see a contract renewed. The sun will rise tomorrow, the rains will come, the maize will grow, because their ruler has bled the world into balance. And those labyrinthine palaces we've talked about, they weren't just houses, they were theaters. Courtyards became stages for ritual dances, processions, and bloodletting dramas. Walls carved with serpents and cosmic monsters created the backdrop. Even staircases were part of the illusion. At Chichen Itza's Temple of Kukulkan, during the equinox, the setting sun casts shadows along the staircase that form the shape of a serpent slithering down the pyramid. Imagine standing in that crowd, the shadow serpent slowly descending as the king, dressed as the feathered serpent itself, stands at the base. Coincidence? Not a chance. That's cosmic choreography. And let's not forget warfare. War wasn't just about land. It was about bodies, captives, fuel for the theater of sacrifice. When kings paraded bound captives before their people, they weren't just flexing military might. They were showing that they could feed the cosmos with living offerings. Those captives were currency, traded not for wealth, but for cosmic legitimacy. And when the sacrifices were carried out, often atop pyramids, blood flowing down the steps, it wasn't hidden. It was the most public act of kingship you could imagine. Here's the kicker. It worked. People believed it. When the rains came, it proved the king's ritual power. When the maize sprouted, it was evidence that the gods had listened. And when droughts or disasters struck, well, maybe it meant the king had failed, which explains why dynasties rose and fell so violently. The cosmic drama was high-stakes theater, with no room for flubbed lines. Even their burial reflected this cosmic role. When rulers died, their tombs weren't simple graves. They were designed as portals. Jade beads placed in their mouths symbolized maize kernels, so the king could be reborn like corn sprouting from the earth. Their bones became seeds, their tombs became caves, their souls became serpents slithering between worlds. Death itself was a performance staged to guarantee cosmic renewal. Think about how exhausting this must have been. Every public act wasn't just politics, it was cosmology. Every costume change, every cut of the flesh, every step up the pyramid carried the weight of the universe. Fail and your people starved. Succeed and you were literally divine. No pressure, right? And yet they leaned into it with gusto. They weren't just administrators, they were actors in the grandest play imaginable. Feathered serpents, labyrinthine palaces, blood, smoke, and stone. Kingship was spectacle, and everyone was in the audience. All right, so far we've been hanging out with kings and queens, bleeding onto bark paper and summoning gods out of smoke. But let's be real, 90% of the population wasn't perched on thrones with jade dripping from their ears. They were out in the fields, sweating under the sun, making sure the maize grew so the whole cosmic drama didn't collapse. You want to understand Mesoamerican civilization? Forget the rulers for a second. Look at the guy bent double in a cornfield with a stone hoe. Daily life for commoners was tough. No surprise there. Maize was the beating heart of everything. Not just a crop, literally life itself. Their creation myths said humans were made from maize dough. So, imagine waking up at dawn, stomach growling, and the first thing you do is check your milpa, your cornfield. If the maize was sprouting, the gods were happy. And maybe, just maybe, your family wouldn't go hungry. If it wasn't, time to panic, because no maize meant no tortillas, no tamales, no life. And it wasn't just maize. Beans and squash rounded out the holy trinity of Mesoamerican farming. Together, they formed a perfect nutritional cycle. Maize gave carbs, beans added protein, squash provided vitamins. It's like the original food pyramid, except instead of kale smoothies, you've got steaming tamales wrapped in corn husks. Delicious, yes, but you'd eat them day after day, year after year. Imagine never tasting bread, never chewing on beef, never smelling fried chicken. Your culinary world revolved around maize. You lived by it, you died by it. And you weren't eating alone. Extended families shared meals, sometimes entire compounds of relatives. Life was communal, noisy, chaotic. Kids running barefoot, dogs weaving between legs, smoke curling from halls. Women ground maize on stone slabs, hour after hour, kneeling on hard floors until their backs ached. That sound of stone on stone grinding was the soundtrack of daily life. Archaeologists can even see it in skeletons, the knee and back damage from years of grinding maize into flour. The gods demanded order and blood from the kings, but from the women, they demanded labor, endless and invisible. Clothing was simple but symbolic. Cotton if you were wealthy, woven maguey fiber if you weren't. Color and decoration screamed your social status louder than any Instagram profile ever could. You might only have one good tunic, worn until it fell apart, but it marked who you were in society. And jewelry? Jade and feathers were out of reach for most commoners, but shells, bones, or bits of polished stone still gave you a hint of style, a little connection to the glittering world of the elites. Work never stopped. Fields had to be cleared, planted, weeded. Houses had to be repaired with mud and thatch. Water had to be hauled, food prepared, clothing woven. And then, on top of it all, there were taxes. Tribute to your local rulers wasn't optional. You owed maize, labor, textiles, cacao beans, whatever was demanded. You think filing taxes once a year is bad? Imagine knowing that men from the palace could knock on your door any day and demand part of your harvest, or drag you into a construction crew for the next pyramid project. Civic duty, Mesoamerican style. And don't think commoners were disconnected from the cosmic show. Ritual bled down into everyday life. Households had their own shrines, little altars tucked in corners with figurines of maize gods or household spirits. Incense was burned, prayers whispered, offerings made. You didn't need a pyramid to talk to the gods. You just needed a bowl of food or a splash of pulque, that foamy, fermented drink made from maguey sap. It wasn't grand spectacle, but it was deeply personal. A farmer kneeling before a tiny clay idol was just as much a part of the cosmic system as a king slicing his tongue on a pyramid. Festivals pulled everyone into the cosmic drama. You'd be in the crowd watching dancers in feathered costumes whirl through the plaza, drums pounding, incense choking the air. You didn't just watch, you participated, bringing food, chanting prayers, maybe even playing your role in the ball game if you were unlucky. The line between spectator and performer was razor thin. Everyone was part of the cosmos, whether you wanted to be or not. And yes, death hovered close. Infant mortality was brutal. Disease struck without warning. Drought could wipe out entire villages. For commoners, life was fragile, every season a gamble. But this fragility only reinforced the cosmic worldview. If the rains didn't come, it wasn't bad luck. It was a sign the gods were displeased, that the rituals hadn't been enough. So when rulers demanded more tribute for sacrifices, people complied. It wasn't cruelty in their eyes, it was survival. Think about this. You're a farmer in a Maya city-state. You've just spent the morning weeding your maize, sweat dripping into your eyes. You walk home, drop your tools, and look up at the temple towering above. You know your ruler is up there, bleeding into the smoke, dressed as a serpent, claiming to keep the universe in balance. Do you doubt it? Probably not. Because if you did, how would you explain the miracle of the maize sprouting from the ground? Or the terror of a drought that leaves your children hungry? The cosmic show wasn't just propaganda. It was the framework that made sense of your world. So while kings strutted on pyramids and queens pulled thorny ropes through their tongues, the real backbone of the cosmos was the farmer, the weaver, the grinder of maize. They didn't wear jade or command armies, but they fed the system, literally. Without them, no king could bleed enough to keep the sun rising. All right, you've got your maize, your grinding stones, your tribute collectors breathing down your neck. But what happens when your body betrays you? When fever strikes? When your child coughs all night? When you cut your foot on a sharp stone in the field? This is where Mesoamerican medicine steps in, an intricate mix of herbal knowledge, ritual, and sheer cosmic negotiation. Forget hospitals and white coats. Here, your doctor was part botanist, part priest, part magician. First off, the plants. These civilizations knew their flora like the back of their hand. The rainforest was basically their pharmacy, and they could rattle off cures for everything. They were medicine, rubbed on wounds as antiseptic, stuffed up the nose to clear congestion. Painful, sure, but effective. Aloe was used for burns. Copal resin wasn't just incense, it doubled as an antiseptic and wound feeler. Tobacco, a powerful stimulant, used in small doses to sharpen the mind or as part of rituals. Used in large doses, hallucinatory journeys into the spirit world. It all depended on how far you wanted or dared to go. But medicine wasn't just chemistry. Illness wasn't seen as purely physical. Sickness often meant imbalance. between you and the gods, between you and the underworld, between your soul and your body. If you were sick, it could mean you'd angered a deity, or that a malevolent spirit had slipped into your body. So treatments involved more than just herbs. There were chants, ritual cleansings, offerings, even full-blown ceremonies to drive out the sickness. The line between doctor and shaman was basically non-existent. Now, here's where serpents slither back in. The serpent was the ultimate liminal creature, sliding between earth and underworld, shedding its skin like a rebirth. It became a symbol of healing, transformation, renewal. In Aztec and Maya medicine alike, serpent imagery pops up as a reminder that to be healed was to be transformed. Even some gods of medicine carried serpent attributes, wielding staffs with coiled snakes or embodying reptilian traits. And snake venom? Feared, yes, but also studied, experimented with. The snake that could kill you was also thought to teach you how to heal. Let's zoom in on childbirth, a life and death moment for women. Midwives held immense power, often revered as semi-priestesses. They guided women through labor with both practical knowledge and ritual invocations, calling on the gods to ease the passage. The mother's cries weren't just screams. They were part of the cosmic process, echoing the myth of creation itself. If the baby survived, offerings of food or incense were made in gratitude. If not, the loss wasn't just personal grief. It was interpreted within a cosmic framework, a soul slipping into another realm. Some traditions even equated women who died in childbirth with warriors fallen in battle, their spirits honored as fierce and sacred. Injuries? Oh, those were everywhere. Farming with stone tools, building temples, playing the ball game. You were going to get hurt. Bones were set with splints, wounds washed with herbal concoctions, poultices slapped on to draw out infection. But infection was always lurking. One bad cut could spiral into fever and death. And with no antibiotics, sometimes the only hope was a ritual cleansing, a prayer, or sheer luck. Survival was precarious, and everyone knew it. Then there's the role of sweat baths, or tamazals. Imagine a low stone or clay hut, heated with volcanic rocks, steam rising as water hisses off the stones. It was a place to cleanse, heal, and rebalance. Sweat baths weren't just about hygiene, they were therapy, detox, and spiritual reset rolled into one. Women used them after childbirth, warriors before and after campaigns, the sick to purge fevers. It was medicine by way of ritual sauna, and it worked on both the body and the soul. Now let's talk about the spiritual side of healing. Shamans or ritual specialists were called in when illness was seen as soul loss. Maybe you'd walked too close to a cave or offended a household spirit, and part of your soul had slipped away. The cure? A ceremony to call it back. This might involve drumming, chanting, burning incense, and sometimes hallucinogenic substances. The healer entered a trance, journeying into other realms to retrieve your missing soul. To modern ears, it sounds mystical. To them, it was practical medicine. If your child stopped eating or your husband wasted away, soul retrieval wasn't optional. It was survival. And here's the kicker. Some of it actually worked. Not the soul retrieval, maybe, but the herbs, the sweat baths, the wound care, they had real therapeutic effects. Archaeologists and pharmacologists have studied the plants used, and many contain active compounds still used in modern medicine. Willow bark for pain relief, passion flower for anxiety, morning glory seeds with psychoactive alkaloids. They may not have had microscopes, but they had generations of careful observation and trial and error. But medicine wasn't just about fixing individuals. It reinforced the cosmic order. A healed body was proof that the gods were appeased, that balance was restored. Failure to heal wasn't necessarily the healer's fault. It might mean the gods had claimed someone, that the cosmos demanded their life. Every cure or death fit within that larger story. You weren't just sick, you were part of a cosmic drama. Your fever a skirmish in the eternal battle between life and death. So next time you imagine a Maya or Aztec city, don't just think of pyramids and rituals. Picture the everyday reality. A child with a cough, a farmer nursing a cut, a woman in labor, a healer whispering prayers while grinding herbs. Picture serpents slithering through both medicine and myth, promising death and renewal in the same breath. Because in this world, health wasn't just biology, it was cosmology written into the body. We've talked about medicine, about healing the body and soul. But let's flip it. What about the deliberate spilling of blood, not to feel, but to feed the gods? Because in Mesoamerica, warfare wasn't just politics with spears. It was cosmic accounting. Every battle was fought on two fronts, on the field and in the heavens, and the feathered serpent slithered through both. War was constant. City-states rose and fell like dominoes. Alliances cracked, neighbors turned on neighbors. But unlike modern warfare, conquest wasn't always the goal. Sometimes it was tribute, sometimes it was territory, but often it was people. Living, breathing captives were the real prize. Why? Because they weren't just trophies, they were cosmic fuel. Sacrifice demanded bodies, and war was the supply chain. The Aztecs perfected this. Their so-called flower wars weren't fought to annihilate the enemy, but to capture prisoners for sacrifice. Imagine a battle where the goal isn't to kill your opponent, but to grab him alive, drag him back, and later cut his heart out atop a pyramid. To us, it sounds deranged. To them, it was practical. The gods demanded blood, and it was your civic duty to provide it. If your gods stopped being fed, the sun might stop rising, the universe might unravel. No pressure. And don't think the Maya were innocent of this. Their art is full of war captives kneeling, bound, often stripped naked, paraded before victorious kings. Lintels and stelae show captives about to be sacrificed, sometimes even flayed alive, their skins worn by priests in a grotesque performance of rebirths. These weren't back alley killings. They were front row, plaza-sized spectacles. Thousands watched, drums pounding, incense clouds rising, warriors dancing with obsidian blades flashing. The act itself was brutal, deliberate, and theatrical. At the Templum Mayor in Tenochtitlan, captives were led up the steep steps, one after another, until they reached the altar at the top. There, priests in feathered regalia laid them on a stone slab, stretched their arms and legs, and cut open their chests with a razor-sharp obsidian blade. In seconds, the heart was ripped out, still beating, held high to the sun. Blood cascaded down the steps, visible to everyone in the plaza below. The body rolled down the pyramid like a macabre puppet show. And this wasn't a once-in-a-blue-moon thing. It was routine, woven into the calendar, tied to festivals, to cosmic cycles. And the feathered serpent? Always there. Quetzalcoatl was a god of wind, wisdom, and creation, but also associated with sacrifice. In some myths, he even sacrifices himself to bring life to humanity. That paradox, creation through destruction, was the logic behind human sacrifice. Blood wasn't just gore, it was essence, the sacred fuel of existence. The serpent, gliding between life and death, embodied that paradox perfectly. Now, let's zoom in on the warrior's perspective. From a young age, Aztec boys were trained for battle. Every strike, every throw of the spear was aimed not at killing, but at disabling. You wanted your enemy alive. Killing him on the battlefield was almost wasteful. Better to wound, capture, and drag him back as an offering. To take captives was the highest honor, a mark of status. Warriors who captured many rose through the ranks, earning flashy costumes, more wives, higher prestige. The battlefield was just the audition. The pyramid steps, that was the final act. And for the captives, imagine the terror. You're dragged through foreign streets, jeered at, stripped, painted, sometimes forced to wear mock costumes. You know exactly what's coming. Your life is now a countdown to a knife of obsidian and a cheering crowd. Some captives, though, embraced it. In their worldview, to be sacrificed was an honor. You were becoming food for the gods, joining the eternal cycle. In some myths, sacrificed warriors became hummingbirds or butterflies flitting around the sun. Terrifying, yes, but also, in their eyes, transcendent. This constant cycle of war and sacrifice had a very real political function. It kept the machine running. The Aztec Empire, for example, wasn't sustained by raw conquest alone. It was sustained by a steady flow of tributes and captives. Tribute filled the warehouses. Captives filled the altars. Both reminded subject peoples of who held the cosmic leash. Refuse to provide tribute? Expect an army knocking on your door. Refuse to provide captives? Expect your own people to end up on someone else's altar. And here's the irony. For all the blood, all the brutality, this system was stabilizing in its own way. Everyone played their part. Commoners provided food. Kings provided rituals. Warriors provided captives. Priests provided the sacrifices. The whole cosmos was like a giant machine that needed constant lubrication, except the oil was human blood. To modern eyes, it's monstrous. But try to step into their shoes. Imagine believing deep in your bones that without sacrifice, the sun won't rise tomorrow. Would you kill to save your family from cosmic collapse? Would you die if it meant the maize would grow and the rains would come? For them, the answer was yes, and it wasn't hidden. That's what makes it so different from modern violence. We hide our wars in distant lands, behind TV screens. They staged theirs in the heart of the city, on top of pyramids, under the open sky, with thousands watching. Blood was public, visible proof that the cosmos was being fed. It was raw, visceral reassurance. So when you picture those labyrinthine palaces and serpent-covered pyramids, don't forget the rivers of blood that once ran down their steps. To the people who lived there, those weren't stains, they were lifelines. So far, we've walked through caves, pyramids, palaces, medicine huts, and battlefields. But here's the real trick. All of it was on a schedule. Because in Mesoamerica, time wasn't a straight line marching forward like a boring office calendar. Time was a serpent, looping, coiling, circling back on itself. Every day, every year, every century was part of a cosmic choreography. And the people who knew the steps, priests, kings, astronomers, those who could read the serpent's coils. The Maya were obsessive about this. Their calendars weren't just practical tools for planting crops. They were cosmic roadmaps. You've probably heard of the so-called Mayan calendar that was supposed to predict the end of the world in 2012. That whole panic was nonsense, of course. What it really reflected was the end of one great cycle and the beginning of another. Because for them, endings weren't apocalypses, they were renewals, like a snake shedding its skin. They had multiple calendars running at once, interlocking like gears. The Ha'ab, a 365-day solar calendar, kept track of seasons, perfect for farming. The Zolkin, a 260-day sacred calendar, mapped ritual and divination. Combine the two and you get the calendar round, a 52-year cycle. Imagine living in a world where every day was loaded with cosmic meaning, where your birthday wasn't just a date, but a destiny, where marriages, wars, and coronations all had to be scheduled according to the serpentine rhythms of time. And then there's the long count, the granddaddy of them all. It tracked vast epics stretching thousands of years back into mythic prehistory. When Maya scribes recorded dates, they weren't just saying King so-and-so conquered city X in the year Y. They were tying events into cosmic time, showing how every human act was stitched into the fabric of eternity. Your king isn't just a warlord. He's part of the same cycle that began with the creation of the world. Heavy stuff. The Aztecs had their own system just as elaborate. Their Tonalpahali, a 260-day ritual calendar, and their Xiuhpohali, a 365-day solar calendar, interlocked like the Mayas. But the Aztecs took the drama up a notch. At the end of each 52-year cycle, they believed the cosmos could literally end if the gods weren't fed. So they staged the new fire ceremony, one of the most chilling rituals in human history. Here's how it went. As the 52 years ticked down, all fires across the empire were extinguished. Total darkness. Imagine entire cities with hearths cold, temples unlit, no cooking, no warmth. The world teetering on the edge of oblivion. Then, at midnight, priests climbed a mountain with a sacrificial victim. They laid him down, cut open his chest, and drilled a new fire in his ribcage. That spark lit torches, which were carried back to relight every hearth, every temple, every street corner. Boom, the cosmos renewed for another cycle. The serpent of time shed its skin, and everyone breathed again. Talk about performance. Netflix has nothing on this. And the feathered serpent? Always coiled in the background. Quetzalcoatl was tied to Venus, the morning star. The rise and fall of Venus in the sky wasn't just astronomy. It was a cosmic clock. Wars, sacrifices, royal rituals, they were often timed to Venus's cycles. When Quetzalcoatl shone brightly before dawn, it was a signal. Time wasn't random. It was alive, embodied in celestial serpents and fiery stars. What does this mean for daily life? Everything. Imagine waking up not just on Tuesday, but on 8 Serpent or 13 Rain. Those weren't just names. They carried omens. A child born on a Thurgin day might be destined for greatness or doomed to tragedy. Priests consulted day signs before marriages, before planting fields, before going to war. Time wasn't neutral. It was loaded, dangerous, alive. You weren't just living through time. Time was living through you. Architecture, too, was a calendar. Pyramids and temples weren't just big stone piles. They were solar observatories, cosmic clocks in stone. At Chichen Itza, during the equinox, shadows rippled down the pyramid's staircase to form a giant serpent. Kukulkan himself, slithering to earth. That wasn't a happy accident. That was precision engineering, where architecture and astronomy fused to create a living calendar, reminding everyone that time itself was divine. But here's the kicker. This wasn't comforting time. It wasn't your modern planner telling you when to pay rent. This was anxious time, terrifying time. Every cycle brought the possibility of collapse. Would the rains come this year? Would the sun rise tomorrow? Would the gods still accept blood? Time wasn't guaranteed. It was borrowed. Every cycle demanded payment. And payment meant blood, sacrifice, ritual. And yet it gave structure. In a world where droughts, plagues, and enemy raids could hit without warning, the calendar provided meaning. Even catastrophe was part of a pattern. Your suffering wasn't random. It was written into the coils of the serpent of time. That belief gave people a strange kind of resilience, because if the cosmos was cyclical, destruction was never final. After collapse came renewal. After drought came rain. After death came rebirth. The serpent always returned. So when you think of Mesoamerican calendars, don't picture neat little grids with doodles in the margins. Picture an endless serpent devouring its tail, each scale marked with days, years, centuries. Picture priests reading the stars like clockwork, rulers timing bloodletting to Venus, commoners living and dying according to sacred cycles. In this world, time wasn't a backdrop. Time was the stage, and the serpent was the clock. You can build temples. You can carve serpents in stone. You can light fires in the chest cavities of unlucky captives. But beneath it all, there's always a story. Because humans need stories. They tell us why the sun rises, why the rain falls, why we have to bleed just to keep the lights on in the sky. And in Mesoamerica, those stories were as labyrinthine as their palaces and as dangerous as their gods. So let's talk about creation, because, spoiler alert, it didn't just happen once. The Mesoamerican universe was rebooted more often than your buggy smartphone. The Aztecs believed we're living in the fifth sun. That means 4 universes came before, and every single one of them crashed and burned. Not metaphorically, literally. Giant jaguars devoured humanity in the first. Hurricanes shredded the world in the second. Fire rained down in the third. A flood swallowed everything in the fourth. Sounds less like Genesis and more like a post-apocalyptic Netflix binge. And in every cycle, gods sacrificed themselves to bring light, and humanity had to pay the debt forward with their own blood. Now enter Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. Unlike some of his divine colleagues, who were basically cosmic mob bosses demanding endless tribute, Quetzalcoatl often came off as a little more approachable. Not soft, not cuddly, but he had moments of generosity. He was credited with creating humans in this fifth age. According to one myth, he descended into the underworld to retrieve the bones of past generations. He ground them up, mixed them with his own blood, and voila, humankind was reborn. Imagine being told your entire species is basically divine bone meal mixed with God plasma. Weirdly comforting, right? But myths weren't just bedtime stories. They were political currency. If your dynasty claimed descent from Quetzalcoatl, you weren't just another chief with a fancy headdress. You were plugged directly into the cosmic mainframe. That's why rulers in places like Tula, Cholula, and later Tenochtitlan loved to plaster feathered serpents all over their monuments. They weren't showing off their artistic flair. They were saying, "See this? I'm not just running your city, I'm balancing the cosmos." The Maya had their own takes. Their Popol Vuh, a sacred book of creation, tells of the hero twins, Hunahpu and Spelunky, who trick and defeated the lords of death in the underworld. Out of their triumph came the sun and the moon. It's a tale of cosmic struggle, yes, but also a morality play about wit, resilience, and sacrifice. And the feathered serpent makes cameo appearances here too, as a bringer of wisdom and order. These stories weren't locked away in priestly libraries. They spilled into daily rituals, into ball games, into political propaganda. Think of it this way. Every stone carving, every painted codex, every ritual dance was myth in action. When the Aztec emperor staged a massive sacrifice, it wasn't just politics. It was literally reenacting the gods' sacrifices that had kept the universe running. Every knife stroke, every drop of blood was both payment and performance. And Quetzalcoatl himself? His myth is a tangle of contradictions. In some traditions, he's the wise priest king, a kind of ancient philosopher who teaches agriculture, astronomy, and writing. In others, he's a tragic figure, betrayed, exiled, wandering eastward on a raft of serpents, promising one day to return. That last story had dangerous consequences when the Spanish arrived. Some sources suggest the Aztec Emperor Moctezuma II might have hesitated to confront Hernan Cortés because he feared Quetzalcoatl's prophecy was coming true. Now, historians debate how much of that was Spanish propaganda versus indigenous belief, but the fact remains, the myth of the feathered serpent was powerful enough to warp history itself. And speaking of labyrinths, these myths were never straightforward. They layered, overlapped, contradicted one another, like a palimpsest written in stone and blood. Was Quetzalcoatl a god, a culture hero, a historical king, a star in the sky, a cycle of Venus? The answer, yes, all of the above. Myth wasn't about consistency. It was about resonance. It was about weaving cosmic order into daily chaos. And that weaving extended into identity. Imagine you're a farmer scratching at maize fields with a wooden hoe. You're sweating under the sun, worried about drought, worried about raids, worried about whether you'll have enough to feed your kids. Then you hear the priest say, "You're here because the gods bled for you. Your life matters because it completes the cycle. Your toil is part of the cosmic design." Suddenly, Your back-breaking work isn't meaningless. It's cosmic. The same story that crowns kings also crowns your cornfield. That's the brilliance of myth in these cultures. It wasn't abstract theology tucked away in temples. It was practical philosophy. It justified kingship. It structured society. It gave meaning to suffering, and it kept entire civilizations rowing in the same direction. And hovering in the background, feathered and coiled, was the serpent, not just a symbol of chaos, not just a predator, but a teacher, a creator, a guide across worlds. So when we talk about cosmic design, we're not just talking about bricks stacked in fancy ways. We're talking about entire cosmologies that demanded people live, bleed, and die according to the stories carved into stone and sung around fires. And if that sounds oppressive, well, it was. But it was also sustaining. The labyrinth of myth was both prison and path, just like those palaces we wandered earlier. If myth was the script, then ritual was the theater. And the stage wasn't some quiet temple hidden in the hills. It was the city itself. Streets, plazas, pyramids, and ball courts, all engineered for spectacle. You didn't just hear the story of gods creating the sun with their blood. You watched it play out, live, in front of thousands of spectators, with real knives and real hearts and real screams echoing off stone walls. Let's start with bloodletting. Forget your modern image of incense, meditation, and a little chanting. In Mesoamerica, prayer came with a price tag, and the currency was your veins. Kings and queens, priests and nobles, every one of them was expected to pierce themselves, offering their own blood to the gods. Tongues, earlobes, even genitals, no body part was too sacred to bleed. Imagine standing at the top of a temple, dragging a thorn or obsidian blade across your skin, while the crowd below cheers, because your pain literally kept the universe spinning. That wasn't a private act. That was cosmic theater. And here's where it gets even more intense. The ball game. If you thought basketball was high stakes, try playing a game where losing might mean decapitation. Ball courts stretched across Mesoamerica, from the Gulf Coast to the highlands, and they weren't just for fun. These were arenas of myth. The Maya hero twins in the Popol Vuh had battled the lords of the underworld in a ball game, and every match reenacted that primordial drama. Players hit a heavy rubber ball with hips, elbows, and knees, trying to send it through stone rings high on the court walls. The game was brutal, exhausting, and sacred. Now, was the losing team always sacrificed? That's a debated point. Sometimes it was captives who played, staged for ritual slaughter. Other times, the winners might be sacrificed as the ultimate honor. Either way, the ball game was never just a sport. It was myth in motion, a cosmic drama where human bodies mirrored divine struggles. And the audience? They weren't just fans. They were witnesses to the eternal battle of life and death, victory and sacrifice. Festivals were even grander. The Aztecs, in particular, staged elaborate pageants that made Broadway look like amateur hour. Every month of their solar calendar was marked with a festival honoring a different deity, and each came with costumes, dances, offerings, and yes, sacrifices. Imagine a city of 200,000 people like Tenochtitlan, the streets decked with flowers, drums pounding, dancers in feathered headdresses twirling in firelight, and at the center of it all, priests lifting blades over captives as the crowd roared. Take the festival of Toxcatl, dedicated to Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror god. For a full year, take the festival of Toxcatl, dedicated to Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror god. For a full year, a young man would be chosen to impersonate the god, treated like royalty, dressed in fine clothes, given wives, feasted like a king. Then, at the festival, he climbed the pyramid, broke his flutes, and was sacrificed. It was theater at its most chilling. A man became a god, lived as a god, and died as a god, reminding everyone that divinity was as fleeting as a year-long role. And don't think these rituals were just top-down spectacles for kings and priests. Ordinary people participated too. Families offered food, flowers, paper banners. Farmers carried their maize to shrines. Craftsmen decorated temples. Entire neighborhoods prepared dances and processions. In the great theater of the cosmos, everyone had a role. It wasn't optional. You couldn't sit this one out. If the gods weren't fed, the rains wouldn't fall, the sun wouldn't rise, and nobody wanted to test that theory. Architecture amplified the performance. Temples weren't just platforms, they were sound systems. At Chichen Itza, the ball court's acoustics bounce whispers from one end to the other. At the Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan, drums and cries echoed across the city, blending with the smell of incense and blood. The pyramid wasn't just a backdrop, it was a cosmic mountain, the axis mundi, where heaven, earth, and underworld touched. Every ritual staged there wasn't just for the crowd, it was for the entire cosmos. And here's where the feathered serpent coils back in. Quetzalcoatl wasn't only a mythic figure, he was embedded in the rituals themselves. Festivals in his honor celebrated wind, knowledge, and renewal. Priests impersonated him, dancers wore serpent costumes, ball games were timed with Venus cycles tied to his domain. When Kukulkan's shadow serpent slithered down the pyramid at Chichen Itza during the equinox, people gathered not just to watch a cool trick of light. They came to witness the living god descending. The boundary between myth, ritual, and reality dissolved. Now, pause for a second. You're in that crowd. The drums are pounding. The air is thick with smoke and sweat. The priests are chanting. A captive is stretched across the altar, obsidian knife flashing in the sun. The crowd surges with anticipation, and when the blade plunges, when the heart is lifted skyward, you don't recoil, you cheer. Because in your worldview, this isn't brutality. It's necessity. It's beauty. It's theater. And it's survival. That's the mental labyrinth these societies built. Myths carved the script. Architecture staged the show, and ritual brought it all to life. It wasn't entertainment. It wasn't optional religion. It was the maintenance of reality. The feathered serpent's coils wrapped around every performance, binding human blood to cosmic design. And as much as we might shudder today, there's a strange awe in recognizing how fully these cultures committed to their stories. They didn't just believe them, they lived them, bled them, built cities around them. And in that commitment, they left us palaces of stone, myths of gods, and the echo of drums that, if you listen closely, still rattle through the serpent's scales. You'd think war is about territory, resources, power, and sure, that was part of it. But in Mesoamerica, war was also about feeding the Cern, stalking the temples, keeping the serpent of time from choking on emptiness. This wasn't just armies clashing in muddy fields. It was the cosmos demanding captives and warriors obliging with sharpened obsidian blades. The Aztecs, in particular, turned warfare into ritual art. Enter the Flower Wars. That's right, they actually called them that. Don't be fooled by the poetic name. These weren't friendly sparring matches or parades of blossoms. They were staged battles fought between rival city-states, especially Tlaxcala and the Aztec Triple Alliance, with one primary purpose: capture, not kill. Imagine charging into battle not to slaughter your enemy, but to drag him home alive so he could be sacrificed in a festival. That's cosmic choreography. And the warriors, they weren't just soldiers. They were actors in a divine drama. Young men trained from childhood in schools called Telpochcali, or, if they were nobles, Calmecac, learning not just how to fight, but how to capture. Killing on the spot? Wasteful. The gods didn't want corpses rotting in the dirt. They wanted warm, beating hearts lifted high on temple platforms. Warriors earned prestige not by body count, but by how many captives they could deliver. The greatest among them became eagle warriors or jaguar warriors, decked in feathered costumes embodying predators of the sky and earth. Their very identities fused with cosmic symbols, turning the battlefield into a living myth. Every strike, every lasso, every grapple was both martial skill and religious duty. To lose in battle and be taken captive wasn't necessarily shameful. It was often considered an honorable fate, because you'd be feeding the sun itself. And let's talk weapons. No steel, no cavalry, no cannons, just obsidian and wood. The macahuitl, a wooden club edged with razor-sharp obsidian blades, could decapitate a horse once the Spaniards arrived. Spears, atlatls, spear throwers, bows, and slings rounded out the arsenal. Brutal, yes, but also precise. They were designed to incapacitate rather than simply kill, to wound and capture. A battlefield wasn't a slaughterhouse. It was a harvest ground for sacrifice. This cosmic economy of war had staggering consequences. For one, it sustained the machinery of religion. Every festival required victims, and warfare provided the supply. When the Aztec state expanded, they didn't just demand tribute in maize, cacao, and textiles. They demanded tribute in blood. Subjugated cities had to send captives, feeding the endless hunger of the sun. In a sense, war wasn't about conquest alone. It was about cosmic logistics. Now picture the scale of it. The chronicles say that during the dedication of the Templo Mayor in Tenochtitlan in 1487, thousands of captives were sacrificed over several days. The numbers are debated. Spanish accounts may have exaggerated into the tens of thousands. But the point remains. War wasn't just diplomacy by other means. It was theology with obsidian teeth. The serpent of time demanded blood, and armies marched to supply it. And again, architecture comes into play. Imagine the captured warriors dragged up the steep steps of the pyramid, drums echoing, the crowd chanting. Their final moments weren't private. They were staged for everyone, binding warfare to spectacle. The act of war wasn't completed on the battlefield. It climaxed on the temple platform. Blade flashing, heart raised, serpent fed. Of course, not everyone bought into the system equally. Rival states like Tlaxcala fought tooth and nail against the Aztec Triple Alliance, sometimes losing, sometimes winning, but always supplying the gods with bodies in the process. Ironically, when the Spanish arrived, Tlaxcalans sided with them, eager to break free from the endless cycle of flower wars and tribute. But before that alliance shifted history, these ritualized wars defined Mesoamerican politics for generations. And here's the bitter irony. War, which we moderns often paint as senseless destruction, was, for them, sense itself. It was necessary order. Without it, the cosmos risked unraveling. Every captured warrior wasn't just a man. He was a cosmic payment, a living coin dropped into the serpent scales to keep time turning. Think about how that shaped psychology. A farmer's son might be drafted, trained, and sent into war not just to defend his homeland, but to bring home captives. He'd march under banners that bore God's symbols to the beat of drums designed to echo the heartbeat of the cosmos. He'd face enemies who were taught the same cosmology, who fought with the same goal. The clash wasn't random violence. It was ritualized symmetry. Even enemies understood their roles, And then there's the personal ambition. For young Aztec men, capturing 4 enemies in battle could elevate you to the status of eagle or jaguar warrior, giving you land, prestige, and wives. War was a career ladder, a cosmic meritocracy sharpened by obsidian blades. Every swing of the Maquite was a gamble. Bring home a captive or be taken as one. Either way, your blood had meaning. It's chilling, it's alien, but it's also strangely coherent. Warfare as theology, sacrifice as logistics, battlefields as hunting grounds for the sun. And through it all, the feather serpent slithered in the background, patron of knowledge and wind, but also tied to cycles of death and renewal. War wasn't just human folly. It was part of the cosmic design, carved in stone and myth, enacted again and again in smoke, blood, and the echo of drums. It's tempting to imagine these civilizations only in terms of kings, priests, and bloody altars. But what about everyone else? The farmers, artisans, traders, kids playing in the dusty courtyards, mothers grinding maize at dawn. Because as much as cosmic drama was written in temples and war, the real engine that kept these societies alive was the endless grind of daily life. And in that grind, the feathered serpent's coils were always present, sometimes visible, sometimes subtle, but always there. Picture sunrise in Tenochtitlan. The air is crisp over the lake, canoes already cutting through the water as fishermen cast nets and traders paddle toward the bustling markets. In the city's narrow streets, women squat at stone metates, grinding maize into dough for tortillas. The smell of fresh masa drifts with smoke from cooking fires. Children run errands, carrying bundles of wood or jugs of water from canals. And above all this daily hum, the twin towers of the Templo Mayor dominate the skyline, looming reminders that every tortilla, every traded fish, every child's laugh exists because the gods have been fed. For farmers, life was dictated by cycles of maize. This wasn't just food, it was identity. People called themselves children of maize. Myth held that humanity itself was fashioned from corn dough. Planting and harvesting weren't just agricultural chores, they were rituals. Every kernel had cosmic weight. When drought struck, it wasn't only a natural disaster, it was a crisis in the governance between humans and gods. Entire families prayed, offered incense, maybe even shed blood to coax the rain. Their sweat in the fields was part of the same cosmic transaction as the king's sacrifices on the pyramid. Artisans felt the weight too. Potters, feather workers, stone carvers, they weren't just producing goods, they were crafting offerings. A painted vase might end up buried in a temple foundation. A feathered cloak might be worn by a priest impersonating Quetzalcoatl. A carved obsidian knife might pierce a chest. Their work wasn't just commercial, it was sacramental, tying hands calloused by labor into the divine machinery. And let's not forget the markets, bustling hubs that shocked the Spaniards when they first arrived. Tenochtitlan's great market at Tlatelolco was said to host 20,000 to 40,000 people on busy days. Rows of stalls offered cacao beans, obsidian blades, woven cloth, exotic birds, spices, salt, shells, and even live animals. It was capitalism with cosmic flair. Trade wasn't separate from religion. The gods were invoked in every exchange, with shrines inside the market itself. The feathered serpent, as a bringer of knowledge and wind, was invoked by merchants who saw commerce as part of the cosmic design. Family life pulsed under the same rhythms. Children were expected to work from an early age, hauling wood, tending fields, helping in craft workshops. But they also learned stories, myths, and rituals. Boys trained in schools where they memorized hymns to gods, drilled in military skills, and learned discipline. Girls learned to weave, cook, and manage households, but their role wasn't passive. Women could become priestesses, midwives, healers. Every role, whether kneading dough or chanting in temples, fed into the same labyrinthine system, cosmic order upheld by human hands, and education. Forget the idea that only elites learned. True, nobles got the advanced curriculum, astronomy, philosophy, governance. But commoners too had their schools, their lessons in ritual, farming, and combat. Knowledge itself was sacred. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was often hailed as the bringer of writing, of calendars, of wisdom. To study, to memorize chants, to track Venus in the sky, these weren't luxuries. They were ways of aligning your mind with the serpentine coils of the cosmos. But let's be honest, daily life wasn't all sacred resonance. It was also exhausting, dirty, and precarious. Grinding maize for hours every day destroyed women's backs and knees. Farmers battled not just weeds and pests, but oppressive tribute demands. A family might owe maize, textiles, and labor service to the state, on top of the gods' share. Markets were vibrant, yes, but theft and disputes were constant. Disease lurked in crowded neighborhoods, and above it all, the threat of drought, flood, or war never disappeared. Life was lived under pressure, and yet there was joy. Feasts, music, and dancing filled festivals. Ball games weren't always tied to sacrifice. Sometimes they were just sport. Families shared tamales, chocolate drinks, roasted maize. Children played with clay toys shaped like animals, spun tops, or staged mock battles. Even in a world so tightly coiled by cosmic duty, laughter found cracks to escape. The serpent's scales weren't only sharp, they glimmered too. Domestic rituals stitched the cosmic into the mundane. A mother might sprinkle drops of pulque, fermented agave drink, as an offering before taking her first sip. A farmer might leave a few kernels of maize at a shrine before planting. Birth, marriage, death, each came with ceremonies, tying individuals to gods. A newborn's umbilical cord might be buried under the hearth, binding the child to the household's sacred space. Everyday life was an endless braid of survival, obligation, and ritual, woven so tightly that there was no separating them. Now, imagine living in that world. You wake at dawn to feed your children, grind maize until your arms ache, send your son to school where he's drilled in war chants, head to the market to trade woven cloth, offer a flower at a shrine on your way home, and fall asleep hearing the drums of a ritual in the distance. Every act, no matter how small, feels like it ripples into the cosmos. Your sweat, your breath, your meals, all feeding the great serpent. This is what makes Mesoamerican civilization so haunting. It wasn't just about kings with crowns of feathers or priests with obsidian knives. It was about ordinary people who carried cosmic weight in their daily chores. They didn't live under myth and ritual. They lived through it, every waking moment. And that's the labyrinth. You couldn't find an exit because the walls weren't just stone. They were built into the rhythm of your own heartbeat. Step into a Mesoamerican city, and you're not just surrounded by stone and people. You're enveloped in art that shouts at you from every direction. Walls, staircases, ceramics, codices, costumes, every surface became a canvas. And the recurring stars of this visual spectacle? The serpent, feathered and angulating, and the labyrinth, where they're carved into stone or mapped in ceremonial layouts. These weren't abstract doodles or pretty decorations. They were visual spells, compressing theology, politics, and cosmology into images you couldn't ignore. Let's start with serpents. Everywhere you looked, there they were, carved into staircases, painted across murals, curling around ritual masks. In Teotihuacan, the Temple of the Feathered Serpent was practically a billboard for cosmic propaganda. Dozens of stone serpent heads jut out, jaws wide, fangs bared, feathers flowing along their snouts, not subtle. Imagine being a farmer walking up those steps, your entire field season reduced to stone jaws ready to devour you if you don't keep up your end of the bargain with the gods. That's art as theology, intimidation, and civic identity, all at once. And those feathers weren't just artistic flourish. Feathers symbolized the sky, the divine, the ephemeral beauty of life. Birds could soar where humans could not, connecting earth to heaven. Combine that with the serpent, the master of earth, water, and fertility, and you get a hybrid creature that collapses all boundaries. The feathered serpent isn't just slithering on the ground. It's flying, transcending, dragging your imagination along. This wasn't cute mythology. It was cosmic design, carved in basalt. But murals tell us even more. In Teotihuacan's apartment compounds, walls bloomed with painted imagery. Jaguars blowing conch shells, gods emerging from flowers, streams of water dotted with precious shells and jade. Serpents appear not just as predators, but as conduits of water and fertility, winding across walls like living rivers. The colors were bold, reds, blues, greens, meant to dazzle under sunlight. Think of it as Instagram before Instagram. Images carefully curated to remind you who you were, what forces governed your world, and what rituals you owed them. Codices, the painted books of the Maya and later Aztecs, were like portable labyrinths of meaning. Open one, and you're staring into a world where serpents coil into borders, gods emerge from their mouths, and calendars dictate the flow of life. They weren't books the way you think of a novel. They were interactive cosmic diagrams. A priest reading one wasn't skimming text. He was walking a visual path, a labyrinth of glyphs and images designed to guide him through the cosmos. The feathered serpent slithers through these manuscripts as a teacher, a threshold guardian, a sign that the knowledge you're accessing is not human, it's divine. And then there's featherwork, an art form so astonishing the Spanish practically drooled over it. Imagine cloaks, headdresses, shields, all covered in iridescent quetzal feathers, shimmering turquoise, emerald, and gold in the sun. Feathers weren't just fashion, they were currency, tribute, offerings, status symbols. Wearing a feathered serpent motif wasn't just style, it was transformation. A priest donning such regalia became the serpent, embodying its cosmic role during ritual. Art wasn't about representation, it was about becoming. Labyrinth imagery is subtler but no less potent. Mesoamerican architecture often forces you into maze-like experiences. You don't just walk into a temple, you're led through courtyards, stairways, chambers, each a stage of purification, each narrowing your focus. Palaces themselves were labyrinthine, with corridors leading to courtyards, courtyards leading to hidden shrines, rooms gifted with themes of gods and serpents. You could get lost not just physically, but spiritually, moving deeper into sacred space. The architecture was the ritual. By the time you reached the inner sanctum, you weren't the same person who entered. You'd been wound tighter and tighter into the serpent's coils. Even jewelry and small objects hummed with this visual language. A carved jade pendant of a serpent's head wasn't just an accessory. It was a portable prayer, a cosmic safeguard. Obsidian mirrors polished to a hypnotic black sheen were more than tools. Gazing into one meant peering into another layer of the labyrinth, a portal where serpents slithered as guides between worlds. Kings used them for divination, staring into their depths to commune with gods. It's unsettling, isn't it? To imagine your reflection as an entry point to another reality, guarded by scaled guardians. And the irony? When the Spaniards arrived, they tried to dismiss this art as barbaric, while simultaneously looting every piece they could lay hands on. They couldn't resist the shimmering feather cloaks, the golden serpent ornaments, the painted codices, which they mostly burned. What survives today is just a fragment of the overwhelming sensory world these people lived in. Imagine how much more there was. Murals now faded, wooden carvings now rotted, textiles long gone. Their world must have been visually overwhelming, almost psychedelic in intensity. Here's the kicker. None of this art was meant to be passive. It wasn't something you hang on a wall to admire over a glass of wine. It was meant to act on you, to terrify you, inspire you, remind you of your duties, initiate you into mysteries. The serpent's stare wasn't decoration, it was a command. The labyrinthine palace wasn't confusing by accident, it was a ritual in stone. And the codices, they weren't read, they were walked. Like mental mazes. So next time you picture one of those colossal serpent heads jutting from Teotihuacan, don't see it as lifeless rock. See it as a mouth mid-sentence, speaking in symbols. See the scales as pages in a book you're meant to read with your entire body. And realize that in this world, art wasn't background. It was the cosmos itself, carved and painted into being, surrounding you so completely that you couldn't escape, even if you wanted to. If daily life in Mesoamerica was woven into myth and ritual, then the priests were the master weavers. They weren't just religious functionaries, they were timekeepers, astronomers, historians, performers, and politicians rolled into one. And whether you feared them or revered them probably depended on how close you stood to the obsidian knife. Imagine a priest climbing the steep stairs of the Templo Mayor at dawn, his body smeared with chalk, hair matted with blood. Below him, thousands of people watch. The drums thunder, shells blare, incense coils upward. He's not just a man. In this moment, he is Tezcatlipoca, or Huitzilopochtli, or Quetzalcoatl, the god in flesh. His performance isn't symbolic, it's literal. For the audience, the transformation is real, and the stakes are terrifyingly high. If he falters, if the ritual is botched, the balance of the cosmos wobbles. The sun itself could stutter in its path. But priests weren't only the stars of bloody pageants. They were also mathematicians of the sacred. Their calendars were masterpieces of calculation. The 260-day ritual calendar, the 365-day solar cycle, the 52-year binding cycle. Keeping track wasn't optional. It was cosmic survival. When to plant maize, when to start wars, when to offer sacrifices, all hinged on their interpretations. To be a priest was to walk inside the serpent's coils of time, mapping each twist and turn, warning when the next squeeze was coming. The whiners took on another role, reading omens in bird flights, in maize kernels tossed like dice, in the curling smoke of copal. For commoners, these specialists were lifelines. Is today good for a marriage? Should I plant my fields now? Will my child survive this sickness? Answers didn't come from logic or science as we know it. They came from walking the labyrinth of science, where serpents whispered truth through patterns and coincidences. The diviner's gift was being able to hear it. Shamans blurred the line between priest, healer, and sorcerer. They were the ones who ingested hallucinogenic mushrooms, peyote, morning glory seeds, sacred substances that cracked open the labyrinth's walls. In visions, they spoke to gods, traveled to underworlds, transformed into jaguars, owls, or serpents. Modern science might call it altered states of consciousness. To their communities, it was proof that they could leave the human realm and return with knowledge no ordinary mind could access. When a shaman told you the feathered serpent had appeared in his vision and demanded offerings, you didn't argue. You got your copal ready. And here's the kicker. These roles weren't fringe. They were baked into the very structure of society. Priests trained from childhood, drilled in ritual, fasting, celibacy, and memorizing chants that took years to master. They studied astronomy by tracking Venus and Jupiter, noting eclipses, charting lunar cycles. Some of their calculations were so precise that modern astronomers still marvel. Imagine that. Without telescopes or computers, they could predict celestial events with uncanny accuracy. All because, for them, astronomy wasn't about curiosity. It was about survival. The sun didn't rise because of gravity. It rose because the rituals said it should. But don't romanticize it too much. Priests weren't detached philosophers. They were power brokers. They enforced tribute systems, demanded sacrifices, legitimized kings. A king could claim divine right, but it was the priests who confirmed it, staging the cosmic theater that proved his authority. Without their rituals, his crown was just feathers on a mortal head. In a way, priests were the stage managers of empire, ensuring that every performance of cosmic drama ran on schedule. And in the labyrinth of their rituals, blood always gleamed. Human sacrifice wasn't constant, but when it happened, it was spectacular, and priests orchestrated it. To them, blood wasn't gore, it was fuel. A priest cutting open a chest was like a mechanic opening an engine, making sure the cosmic gears kept turning. Horrifying to us, yes, but in their worldview, refusing to do it would have been criminal negligence. Imagine being told that if you don't spill blood, the sun will literally fail. That's the weight that rested on their shoulders. What about healing? Priests and shamans also acted as doctors, blending herbal knowledge with ritual. They used willow bark for pain, basically aspirin, chili peppers for antiseptic properties, and obsidian scalpels sharper than modern surgical steel. But treatments were never just physical. Illness was often seen as imbalance in the labyrinth of body and spirit. A cure might involve herbs, but also chants, incense, or symbolic offerings. Heal the soul, and the body would follow. Their dress alone told stories. Priests often wore garments dyed black or white, feathers symbolizing their divine patrons, jaguar skins for ferocity, or turquoise mosaics shivering like the sky. Masks transformed them into gods, literally erasing human identity. To speak to a priest in full regalia was to speak to the divine. Even their hairstyles and body paint marked them as thresholds between worlds. They weren't men or women. They were living doors into the labyrinth. And when night fell, the city's priests watched the stars. Torches flickered, codices opened, chants whispered in the dark. Each dot of light was a serpent's eye, each constellation a coil in the cosmic maze. To us, stargazing might be wonder. To them, it was duty, calculation, prophecy. They weren't asking, what's out there? They were asking, will the sun return tomorrow? Will the gods still tolerate us? Will the labyrinth of existence stay intact for one more day? That's the essence of the priestly role, managing uncertainty with ritual precision, ensuring society didn't dissolve into chaos, and maybe, just maybe, scaring the hell out of everyone in the process. Because in a world where serpents ruled the sky and labyrinths swallowed souls, who else could claim to know the way forward? Death in the Mesoamerican world wasn't the end. It was a doorway. And that doorway didn't open into some cloud-filled paradise with harps and eternal picnics. No, it opened into a labyrinth, an underworld full of tests, monsters, rivers, and gods who weren't particularly sympathetic. To die was to start a journey, and your final destination depended on how you lived, how you died, and which cosmic forces claimed your soul. Take the Mexico concept of Mictlan, the land of the dead. Forget about pearly gates. Mictlan was a 9-level obstacle course of horrors. The soul wandered through darkness, crossed mountains that smashed together like giant jaws, waded through icy rivers, dodged obsidian winds sharp enough to flay flesh. Every stage stripped you down until, finally, you reached the Lord and Lady of Death, Mictlantecuhtli and Mictlantecuhtli, skeletal deities with grinning skulls. And only after all that ordeal could you rest in oblivion. Cozy, right? Now, not everyone had to slog through that gauntlet. Warriors who died in battle, women who died in childbirth, and people sacrificed to the gods had express passes. Warriors' souls followed the sun in its daily journey, escorting it across the sky before transforming into hummingbirds or butterflies. Mothers who died in childbirth, seen as warrior equivalents, joined them, radiant in their sacrifice. Sacrificial victims, too, were honored as cosmic fuel. In their deaths, they'd skipped the labyrinth entirely and gone straight to the heavens. For them, blood spilled meant shortcut earned, and the serpent always present. Serpents were threshold guardians of the underworld, guides for souls, symbols of transformation. The feathered serpent embodied not just the bridge between heaven and earth, but also the descent into the underworld's coils. Many myths describe deities traveling through underworld labyrinths to retrieve bones, seeds, or even fire, with serpents marking the path. To journey into darkness meant following a serpent trail, twisting, perilous, but ultimately leading to rebirth. The Maya had their own terrifying underworld, Xibalba, the place of fright. It wasn't just gloomy, it was staffed by sadistic gods who delighted in tormenting visitors. Lord of death, Lord of disease, Lord of filth, Lord of plus. Yes, plus. These guys weren't subtle. Souls, and sometimes unlucky heroes, had to navigate trick houses, the house of knives, where blades flew from walls, the house of bats, where massive creatures swooped in the dark, the house of jaguars, where predators circled hungrily. This wasn't some vague judgment system. It was Saw, Mesoamerican edition. But here's the thing, these myths weren't meant to depress people. They were instruction manuals. Life was understood as preparation for the journey beyond. Funerary rituals were designed to equip the dead with tools, food, clothing, figurines, obsidian blades, even dogs to guide them across rivers in the underworld. Imagine being buried with your loyal spirit dog at your feet, because even in death, you needed a companion to get through the cosmic maze. The labyrinth was terrifying, but it wasn't pointless. Every twist and trial echoed the struggles of life itself. And serpents weren't just obstacles. They were also vehicles. Some myths described souls being carried through the underworld on the back of a great serpent, its body winding like a road through darkness. Others show serpents vomiting or swallowing humans, only for them to emerge transformed, reborn on the other side. The serpent's jaws were the underworld's gates. Terrifying, yes, but also essential. Death was devouring, but also the promise of renewal. Architecture reinforced these beliefs. Caves were sacred because they were portals to the underworld. Descend into a cave, and you weren't just exploring geology. You were entering the cosmic labyrinth itself. Many temples were built directly above caves, with staircases symbolizing descents into the underworld. Murals showed serpents with gaping mouths that doubled as entrances to other realms. Step into those jaws, and you weren't just in a temple. You were halfway to Xibalba. And then there were bones. To us, bones mean decay. To the Mesoamerican mind, bones were seeds, containers of life force that could sprout again. Quetzalcoatl himself descends into the underworld in one myth to steal the bones of previous generations. He bleeds onto them, reviving them into new humans. Think about that. The serpent god as grave robber and life giver in one, winding his way through the labyrinth of death to restart existence. Death and life weren't opposites. They were coiled around each other, inseparable. It's almost ironic. In societies we often stereotype as obsessed with death, what they really were obsessed with was continuity. Death wasn't a full stop. It was a comma. The soul might suffer, the body might rot, but the cycle continued. Serpents shed skins, maize kernels rot before sprouting, the sun sinks only to rise again. The labyrinth wasn't a trap. It was a passage, a necessary maze that kept the universe from unraveling. Now imagine being a commoner burying a loved one. You prepare food offerings, tie cloth around their body, perhaps place a dog figurine near their feet. You know the road ahead will be brutal, but you also know the gods laid out this labyrinth, and the serpent slithers through it as a guide. Your grief is tempered by certainty. Death is not the end. It's just another twist in the coils. And here's the kicker. When the Spaniards saw skull racks, death murals, skeletal gods, they recoiled in horror. To them, it looked like nihilism, barbarism, obsession with gore. But they missed the point entirely. For the Mexica, the Maya, the Zapotecs, death wasn't morbid, it was structure. It was the architecture of the cosmos. To ignore it would have been like ignoring sunrise. So, in the end, the labyrinth of the underworld wasn't about punishment or reward. It was about journey. And serpents weren't demons lurking in the dark. They were the maps, the guides, the very roads that wound through the mystery. In death, as in life, you couldn't escape the coils. You could only walk them step by step until the next transformation awaited. Picture the scene. The year is 1519, and Hernán Cortés steps onto the shores of Mexico. To his men, it's just another campaign of greed and glory. To the Mexica, though, it must have felt like the labyrinth's walls were suddenly shifting, collapsing, reconfiguring into something unrecognizable. Strange ships drifted in like floating mountains, their sails like giant wings. Horses, animals no one in Mesoamerica had ever seen, thundered across the land like living monsters. And then the Spaniards pulled out their trump card, steel and gunpowder. Imagine facing that, armed with obsidian blades and cotton armor. But here's where it gets complicated. The Spaniards didn't just conquer with weapons. They conquered with symbols, stories, and psychological warfare. And in that clash, serpents and labyrinths weren't erased. They were rewritten. Take Quetzalcoatl. Some chronicles claim that Moctezuma II, upon meeting Cortés, hesitated because he thought the Spaniard might be the returning feathered serpent. Was it true? Maybe. Maybe not. Historians argue endlessly over whether that's a Spanish invention. But the fact remains, the Spaniards leaned hard on that idea, exploiting it to cast themselves as cosmic fulfillments rather than foreign invaders. Talk about hijacking mythology. Suddenly, the serpent who once symbolized continuity and knowledge was rebranded as herald of the apocalypse. Temples, those towering labyrinths of stone, became prime targets. the Spaniards burned idols, toppled pyramids, built churches right over the ruins. Walk through Mexico City today, and you can literally stand on the site of the Templo Mayor, while the colonial cathedral looms above. Its architectural conquest, the serpent's coils buried under the cross. But here's the kicker. Those labyrinths didn't disappear. They linger in foundations, in surviving murals, in the stories people whispered, even when priests banned them. The Spaniards couldn't bulldoze the cosmos out of the people's minds. And what about the codices, those brilliant serpentine manuscripts bursting with color and cosmology? Most were burned in the frenzy of Christianization. Bishop Diego de Landa famously incinerated Maya codices, calling them works of the devil. A handful survived, tattered, precious fragments that today sit in European museums. Imagine the libraries of cosmic knowledge that went up in smoke. Imagine priests, their entire lives dedicated to memorizing chants, watching centuries of work curl into ash. That wasn't just loss, that was cultural amputation. Yet, irony of ironies, the Spaniards couldn't resist appropriating the very imagery they tried to erase. Serpents slithered into colonial manuscripts. Labyrinthine patterns creep into church ornamentation. Feathered cloaks get shipped to Spain as royal curiosities. The conquerors denounced the symbolism as demonic while hoarding it in cabinets of wonder. You can practically hear the hypocrisy hissing through the centuries. The conquest wasn't just physical, it was biological. Old world diseases like smallpox tore through indigenous populations with catastrophic speed. Entire cities like Tenochtitlan collapsed not only under siege, but under waves of invisible invaders. To survivors, this must have seemed like the unraveling of the cosmic labyrinth itself. The gods had been fed for centuries, the rituals performed faithfully, the serpent honored, and still the world shattered. What greater crisis of faith could there be? But here's where the story twists again. Resilience. Indigenous people didn't simply surrender their worldview. They adapted, reinterpreted, smuggled serpents and labyrinths into new disguises. The Virgin of Guadalupe, venerated across Mexico, was layered over Tonantzin, an earth goddess. Christian saints absorbed the attributes of old gods. Labyrinthine dances continued at festivals, now rebranded as folk tradition. Serpent motifs slipped into weaving, pottery, architecture, coded resistance hidden in plain sight. The old gods didn't die. They shed their skins. Even written records reflect this survival. The Florentine Codex, compiled under the supervision of Bernardino de Sahagun, contains an encyclopedia of Mexica life, religion, art, medicine, documented by indigenous informants. It's Christianity on the surface, but beneath it, the serpent still coils. Every image, every story is a reminder that the labyrinth could be mapped even under colonial shadow. And here's the dark irony. The Spaniards thought they were bringing order, light, salvation, but in reality, they just built another layer onto the labyrinth. The indigenous cosmos didn't vanish, it twisted, adapted, absorbed the cross into its coils. Even today, Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, merges Catholic and pre-Columbian traditions, skulls and saints, side by side. Death still dances. Serpents still guide souls. The labyrinth still breathes. Think of it this way. The conquest wasn't the serpent's death. It was just another skin shed, another winding path in the maze. The feathered serpent, symbol of renewal, refused to vanish. It found ways to glide beneath the new order, shimmering in art, festivals, and memory. 500 years later, it's still here, coiled under the streets of Mexico City, whispering in Nahuatl prayers, fluttering in Papel Pegado banners at fiestas. So when you look at colonial churches squatting on ancient temples, don't just see victory monuments. See a palimpsest, a layered manuscript where serpents still shimmer under the ink of the cross. The labyrinth never ends. It just keeps adding corridors. Close your eyes for a second and imagine walking through modern Mexico City. Cars honk, neon lights buzz, tacos sizzle on the street corner. It's modern, chaotic, noisy. But if you scratch the serpents just a little, you start to see the serpents again. They're on murals, in festivals, tattooed on skin, woven into textiles, embedded in the national psyche. The feathered serpent never died. It just learned how to live in a metropolis. Take Diego Rivera's murals, for example. In the 20th century, he painted sprawling frescoes across government buildings, filled with swirling serpents, labyrinthine cities, and cosmic metaphors. Rivera wasn't just making pretty pictures. He was channeling Quetzalcoatl, resurrecting the serpent as a revolutionary icon. His art fused the ancient with the modern, pyramids and factories side by side, serpents winding through industrial gears. The labyrinth of history became political, our way of saying our roots matter, our myths matter, our cosmic architecture still scaffolds our identity. And it's not just Mexico. Across Latin America, echoes of these myths ripple. In Guatemala, Mayan ceremonies honoring the plumed serpent still take place, sometimes quietly, sometimes proudly. In Peru, the stepped designs of labyrinthian palaces echo in textiles and festivals. In the American Southwest, Hopi and Pueblo traditions preserve serpent dances that trace ancestry back to Mesoamerican currents. The cosmic serpent's body is continental, stretching from deserts to jungles. Here's a wild twist. Even the flag of modern Mexico is basically a cosmic mural. Think about it. An eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a snake. It's a direct reference to the Mexico Foundation myth, where they were told by the gods to build Tenochtitlan on the spot they saw that omen. That symbol isn't buried in history books. It's on coins, passports, government buildings. Every Mexican carries the serpent and labyrinth with them, literally stamped on their national identity. But the serpent's rebirth isn't limited to national symbols. It's thriving in art, music, literature, and even protest. Indigenous activists invoke Quetzalcoatl in speeches. Murals in Oaxaca paint labyrinthine snakes entwined with slogans for autonomy and resistance. The Zapatistas, rising in Chiapas in the 1990s, leaned on Mayan cosmology to frame their struggle, not as a new revolution, but as a continuation of the ancient labyrinth of survival and renewal. When you fight under the shadow of the serpent, your struggle gains cosmic depth. Even pop culture can't resist the serpent's allure. Movies, comics, video games, they all keep borrowing Mesoamerican imagery, sometimes respectfully, often lazily. You've probably seen feathered serpents pop up in Marvel films, or labyrinthine pyramids reimagined as alien landing sites in science fiction. There is a kind of magnetic pull. These designs feel larger than life, both familiar and uncanny. They resonate because they're primal. The labyrinth and serpent are archetypes buried deep in the human psyche, and every time we dust them off, they shine with fresh relevance. But here's the paradox. Modern fascination often flattens complexity. Ancient temples get branded as tourist attractions. Pyramids become Instagram backdrops. Serpent myths get stripped of their teeth, turned into exotic flavoring for blockbusters. It's appropriation by another name. Just like the Spaniards once burned codices, but hoarded feathered cloaks, today's culture industries consume the serpent while forgetting its sacred weight. Yet, indigenous voices keep insisting. The labyrinth is ours. The serpent is ours. Artists, writers, and activists are reclaiming these symbols, refusing to let them be watered down. Contemporary Nahua poets weave serpentine imagery into verse. Maya communities perform rituals to honor Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, not for tourists, but for the gods. Murals in Los Angeles and Houston celebrate the serpent as a symbol of migrant identity. Because, let's face it, the labyrinth of diaspora is just another corridor in the cosmic maze. And then there's science. Believe it or not, modern researchers sometimes sound eerily like ancient priests when they describe DNA as a double helix serpent, or when they call the universe itself a cosmic web, strands stretching like labyrinthine threads of light. The serpent has just gone molecular, galactic, digital. You could argue that the ancient myths weren't naive. They were metaphors waiting for physics to catch up. Here's the haunting thought. What if we're still in the labyrinth? Not just metaphorically, but literally. Cities with their gridlocked streets are new palaces of stone. Skyscrapers are pyramids of steel. The internet is a labyrinth of data, coiled with digital serpents of code. We're still mapping the cosmos with symbols and architecture, still trying to orient ourselves in the maze. The feathered serpent hasn't vanished. It's just been uploaded. So when you stand in front of a pyramid ruin, or a mural of Quetzalcoatl, or even a protest banner with serpentine designs, realize you're not looking at history. You're looking at continuity. The serpent sheds its skin again and again, but the body underneath remains. The labyrinth keeps expanding, corridors opening into new eras, new struggles, new dreams. And maybe, just maybe, the persistence of these myths is telling us something crucial. That no matter how modern we think we are, no matter how much steel and glass we build, we're still creatures wandering in the maze, still guided by serpents of renewal, still stacking our palaces according to cosmic blueprints we half remember. The feathered serpent isn't gone. It's right here, coiled in murals, in dances, in DNA spirals, in national flags, in whispered prayers. It waits for us to notice, to follow its scales down the corridor, deeper into the labyrinth of who we are. So here we are at the end of the maze. We've walked through temples and tunnels, played with kings, ground maize with farmers, watched serpents slither down pyramids at sunset, and traced their scales all the way into murals, revolutions, and DNA spirals. And after all that, one truth feels impossible to ignore. These weren't just ruins, or myths, or forgotten gods. They were, and still are, living blueprints of how humans make sense of the infinite. Think about it. The feathered serpent isn't just a monster or a mascot. It's a paradox in motion. Earth and sky, fang and feather, death and renewal. It embodies the contradictions of existence and then tells us, through story, ritual, architecture, that contradiction isn't a bug in the system, it's the system itself. To be human is to live between worlds, tangled in paradox, forever slithering through the labyrinth. And the labyrinth, it's not just architecture. It's the way these societies mapped reality. Palaces mirrored caves, pyramids mirrored mountains, plazas mirrored constellations. Every stone was a star, every courtyard a cosmos. When you stepped into those spaces, you weren't just entering a building, you were stepping inside a worldview. And in that worldview, you weren't small, insignificant dust floating through chaos. You were part of a cosmic machine, a living gear and a pattern bigger than imagination. Yes, life was brutal. Farmers broke their backs under the sun. Captives bled on altars. Kings carried impossible cosmic weight. But even in that brutality, there was purpose, coherence, a sense that suffering itself plugged into something eternal. They believed their world was fragile and had to be constantly renewed, and they built entire civilizations around keeping the lights on for the cosmos. That's both terrifying and awe-inspiring. What do we do today? We scroll, we binge, we stack concrete towers, plug into endless notifications, and pretend the world makes sense without ritual, without myth. And yet, somewhere deep down, we still crave the serpent. We still draw labyrinths in our cities and networks. We still tell stories about heroes venturing into the underworld, gods that die and rise again, cosmic monsters that slither at the edges of order. We're still playing the same game, just with different pieces. And maybe that's the lesson the ancients whisper from their stone jaws. The labyrinth never ends. You don't escape it. You live in it. You wander. You learn to read its turns. The serpent doesn't vanish when you kill it. It sheds its skin. It transforms. It comes back brighter. Resilience isn't pretending the chaos isn't there. Resilience is staring the serpent in the eye and realizing, oh, it's me. So the next time you see a pyramid rising from the jungle, or a mural filled with scales and feathers, or even a double helix diagram in a science book, remember this: you're looking at echoes of the same story. The story of people who refused to accept a meaningless cosmos, who carved order into stone, bled visions into smoke, and built labyrinths to house the infinite. We often say civilizations collapse, but collapse is just another turn in the maze. The serpent coils, cultures rise and fall, myths mutate, and still the pattern holds. The stone cracks, but the story keeps breathing. And in a way, that's more eternal than any empire could ever hope to be. So let's close the labyrinth here, not with an exit, but with a reminder. The feathered serpent slithers on, through ruins and revolutions, through myths and murals, through you and me. The labyrinth doesn't end when the walls crumble. It ends when we stop walking. And since we're still here, still wandering, still asking these questions, maybe it never really ends at all. Thanks for walking the maze with me tonight. If you made it all the way here, drop a comment with your city and what time it is. you're officially part of this cosmic journey. And if you haven't yet, hit like, hit subscribe, because we're not done exploring. The Serpent always has another skin to shed, another corridor to open. Until next time, keep your torch lit, your ears open for the hiss in the shadows, and remember, the labyrinth is everywhere.